most important thing about this is that you have this sort of gentle curiosity.
What is, and also thinking about possibilities of what could be.
I have a question. My question is simple. Is an anthropologist a practitioner? And if so, what is our practice?
From the main sort of thing that I've learned by working with laboratory theatre is very much how a practice really is an education of attention. So practices are a way of shifting what we can pay attention to and perceive in the world. So if we are thinking about anthropology as an education, really I think we need to be thinking, what are the practices that we are carrying out? And what do these practices enable us to perceive? And what have they left out?
I'm interested in how anthropologists can be responsive through learning, because I don't think it's that easy. And I think we should put words on why it can be really difficult to actually learn from others, because we also tend to habitually form habits of seeing, habits of perceiving, habits of moving in space. And once these habits are formed through learning, it can actually be difficult or a challenge to move like Carolyn made us do.
My question is really to try and, is there a way in which anthropology can foster or sustain a kind of invention towards seeing the unexpected, seeing something that that isn't imagined beforehand, a kind of something about the practices we adopt, or a sense of the space that we're working in.
But education understood as exducere, as leading out, is quite different from that. It is a practice of, if you will, of exposure that, far from equipping students with all the knowledge they need to cope with adversity and empowering with this knowledge so that they can seize the world, attack it, protect themselves against it, it's a practice of exposure that leads students out in the world, drawing their attention to things that are there, things that would repay further scrutiny.
Is the anthropological process, or is there something within anthropology that causes us or requires us to develop certain sensibilities that, without those sensibilities, we're hindered from learning, we're hindered from being led out in one sense?
So the commitment of that kind of education is to foster not reason, but responsibility, of fostering the ability to notice the world around and to respond to it in ways that are sensitive and attentive and precise. Lots of disciplines study humans in one way or another, but anthropology is distinctive in not just studying human beings, people, but in studying with people. We go to study with people, which means that we are interested in learning from them. And it's in this sense, I think, that anthropology is itself a way of education. As I mentioned at the beginning, not so much a subject taught as one that sets out to learn. And I do think that anthropology is unique in this, in the extent to which it is prepared to take others seriously, to draw on the experiences of people around the world, whatever their background, wherever they live, whatever they do, that they have something to contribute to the questions that concern us all of how to live both now and into the future. So the thing about anthropological study is, because we're going to work with people and learn from them, we learn in a sense, how to perceive things in the way they do, understand things in the way they do. And this opens our eyes and ears to other possibilities of being and knowing.
How can we go out of our comfort zone and to see as other people see and to sense the world as other people sense the world? So the fundamental question is that if I can't live their bodies, how in any sense I can know their lived experience as they live their everyday lives?
It's really a process of disarmament, not of arming ourselves with knowledge, but actually disarming and making us more vulnerable so that we actually see what's out there. Rather, we see the world itself rather than our own knowledge of it. Biesta calls that kind of education a weak education. A weak education, in a sense, takes the power away, but at the same time, it makes us ever so much more attentive to the world that actually, the truth of the world that actually surrounds us.
So my question is that, as a discipline, we are privileged with all these situations are so-called risky or challenging, while other disciplines, while students of other disciplines, they are not exposed to such risky and challenging situations. How can we use the situations or situations of risk or situations or experience and situations of risk and challenge to as openings to learn and to learn from whoever, including nursing home residents with dementia?
There is a particular way of learning and growing what we know in anthropological fieldwork, which is this immersive, right? We join in with families, with lives, with doing whatever life is, and that sort of disconnect between what's the way that we know in fieldwork, then how we then go back to our universities and sit at desks and do something very different. I'm really curious to see how we can sort of spread that way of knowing from fieldwork to our whole practice of anthropology.
I literally became an artist overnight. It was quite almost 17 years ago.
What are the practices that we are carrying out? And what do these practices enable us to perceive? And what have they left out?
Is thinking and writing a practice? Is thinking with people, working with people a practice?
This is a question of how does anthropology itself become a practice of education?
When I was talking with an arts collective, they say, what do you do? I said, oh, I kind of read and write. I work with people. I do what is called ethnography. That's it. Oh, wow, that's art for us. That's an artist.
Education is the way in which a society, any society, produces its own future.
The past 30 years of neoliberal policy reforms and increasing managerialism have radically changed the culture of academia.
One of the conversations that's emerging already around this has to do with the change in institutions themselves and the ways in which we might be moving towards more client models of service, which of course support and undergird the idea of teaching and creating something that turns into a set of nameable skills that students can transfer into employment capital.
And it is how we can make the idea of open-ended education, so the idea of ex ducere, correspond with the learning objectives that academia require, and also with the legitimate, let's use this term, legitimate expectations of students of learning things, of actually learning measurable things.
Also, we wanted to recognise that anthropological education continues to perpetuate exclusion and privilege.
About the buildings we work in, the spaces for doing anthropology, the architecture of universities.
Do we need different kinds of architectures to facilitate these different modes of learning that produce different kinds of knowledge?
The overwhelming commitment of establishment academic anthropology has been towards making studies of other people, to collect the data, to analyze it through ethnographic fieldwork, to analyze it in order to come up with superior accounts of these societies and how they work.
So if you stay with your armor, of knowledge in one sense, you can't be led out into that place of vulnerability and exposure where actually you might learn.
The rich pedagogy has all this information to transmit, all this knowledge that has to be passed on, the curriculum that has to be delivered. But just to point out that a practice that separates the domain of academia, in which we talk to our colleagues and students, and the rest of the world where we go to make studies of people in order to then discuss them within academia, is inherently colonial.
The question is then how can we overcome the kind of Eurocentric white domination, of in the classroom in a way that we still have.
And I wondered also then about that kind of the issue of the buildings, but also the degree to which the university as an institution may become uncongenial as a place for anthropology to happen in some settings, in the contemporary setting.
In the different contexts we study, do we create formal spaces for reflection? Is it something we do on our own? What's the process of reflection and reflexibility in education? So I wondered if that might be interesting.
Something that I'm trying to work towards is thinking about scholarship as regenerative. So drawing from the work that I've been doing with Town is the Garden, which was a project on growing food, and all this regenerative agriculture. How can learning be regenerative in that way? That actually our education is something which is constantly replenishing us rather than an exhausting process that poor students end up getting wiped out by the end of their semesters, and lecturers and everybody. So it's sort of turning into a factory of exhaustion, whereas actually this should be a regenerative process. And what is, I want to know, and I want to make that regenerative process.
My question is related to think about not only infrastructural places, but also about time and the rhythm in education. What time, the importance of silence, the importance of different rhythms in the educational processes. So to link as well space and time and diversity in all this discussion.
And my question is actually about, it may sound very naive or very romantic, but it's about love, because I think we talk very little about love, and we talk about attention, but I see attention as an act of love.
My question to that is, why is it that so much educational discourse never even mentions love?
And that involves questioning how much blame we've put on institutions for the ways that we might teach now. We want to capture those interesting and intrepid and perhaps dangerous kernels where people still teach or are finding new ways of teaching that address the need for intrepid thinking and to foster those ways of being and learning and thinking in our students. And for us in the panel so far, that means taking on board ideas where we can accommodate, understand, and fan the flames of difference.
So thinking about the classroom as this kind of pool of different human beings, all different from one another, how can we, find ways to draw out these differences and just involve them kind of in our style of teaching?
I work with migrant and refugee communities from Myanmar. And how can we include those voices into our teaching, really, into our teaching? That's I think, a key question.
How to mobilize difference as a mode of anthropological teaching, I guess, using the classroom as a field.
But how can we create a space for education as exposure in the classroom with students by means of anthropology? These students cannot keep talking because one student is here and he's making a difference. And this difference has to do with fear of talking. And how can we keep working through exposure when we have fear?
How do we create a space of understanding or commonality, or reciprocal understanding and commonality? Sometimes, we use this kind of standardized language of, we use academic ways of thinking and language as a kind of overarching framework to create this common space. But if we want to be if we want to do justice to these differences, then how do we integrate them? How do we sort of do justice to the different languages and way of beings and way of knowing? So it's more about integrating difference, I guess.
At school or university, we are memorizing, registering, we are acquiring knowledge, and but somehow we are forgetting as well as a process that doesn't happen naturally, of course, because we have so many interaction. Because there's no space for love, for emotions, for affections, because using the body implies a certain level of vulnerability that only love and affection can absorb that. We are not ready for this kind of probably unlearning, right?
So if it is a practice, so what is the practice, and what role does love play in this practice that we either as in, be it pedagogy or be it anthropology or ethnography? So what role does love or love/attention or love/learning, what role does love play? That's my question.